Hey guys, and welcome to this third part of our Houdini Railroads series. In this part, we're going to go over instancing and some random attributes to create high poly ballast in Unreal Engine. I'm immediately going to jump in where we left off during our last tutorial. So our next step is ballast. And the best way to do that is by instancing. So we have this nice flat shape, but it would be so much cooler if we could actually have some rocks. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to create some rocks. So let's start off with creating a box. We're just going to use this. And instead of polygon, I'm going to view this for now so we can actually see what we're doing. And instead of polygon, I want a polygon mesh because that gives me a little bit more detail. Now I know that the stones of the ballast aren't actually 1 by 1 by 1, as in meters. They're a lot smaller. So I'm just going to get some random sizes that I think, okay, this might look good. Alright, this looks like a small rock. Then the next thing I want to do is I want to create a mountain node. And the reason I want to do this is I just want to have a little bit more variance in it. It's a little bit too harsh. So let's see if we change our height and change our element size. We can see 0.2 maybe. Still gets a little bit rough. Maybe 15. That's too straight. It's okay. I'll just keep it like this. Okay, so we have our little rock, and if you're actually making this, you could probably just instance some rocks that artist made, which is a lot more convenient than generating it yourself. For us, it's more important that we can do the placing. I'm gonna hit a UV unwrap again, and I don't want to scale. So if we look at the UV quick shade again, we can see we have nice UVs. I want to have normals on this as well, and except for normals I also want a material. But what I want to be able to do later on is I actually want to show my artist like there is color coding, because we added all the nice colors before. We had the yellow for the blue for the ballast, we had the yellow for the sleepers, and the red for the tracks. So I still want to have that here as well. However, if we're doing instancing, all the information gets saved onto a single point. And it's pretty hard to save a color of an object on a specific point. I mean, we could, but for the instancing it's not convenient. We're just going to save it in the object, so it doesn't have to be copied to every point. But like I said, I want to be able to switch. So again, I'll type switch, and this is going to be our color coding switch. So on one hand, I want to have our Unreal material, so from our normal in here. And on our other hand, I don't want to have our Unreal material. I just want to have what we have here. That color. Because the Unreal material will not show up in Houdini, so we can actually see the color. I don't need the UV quick shade. I believe that this works. And I'm just going to set this to a nice blue. Alright. That looks good. I'm gonna hit L again so we have a nice layout. Cool. So that's basically our first rock. And we're gonna use a copy the points. But we don't have the points yet. You can put this in here. So how do we create the points? That's gonna give an error because we obviously don't have one. So how are we gonna do that? Well, we had our low poly out here. So since this is not gonna be our only output anymore, I'm gonna change the shape. And I'm going to change the name. So this is not our out ballast, but this is our out low poly ballast. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a object merge. And I'll just add this one in here. So now we can actually use whatever we have in here. Now, I want to scatter a lot of points on here. But I don't want to scatter them everywhere, because there's no need to scatter it on the bottom. All those points, you won't see them anyways. So let's first group those and delete those. So we're going to have a group that's automatically set to primitives. That's nice. And then in here, we're we're gonna turn off this group. We're gonna say include by keep by normals. What we want is we want to have a negative value, so we can actually select only the bottom one. If we set it to 180 degrees, it will select everything because it will just go a full circle. But the moment we decrease it, we can see, oh, we're getting less and less and less. Now, I know that in our example, our train tracks are probably going to go uphill, downhill, they might bank a little bit, so we won't have like a very low value like 2 or something. I'm just going to keep it to say 50 might be good. Right, so that gives us still the possibility to angle our curves up, and we would still be selecting it. I'm going to hit blast. And obviously I only want to blast our group. I don't want the ballast. Right, well that gives us our nice top. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type a scatter node. I'm going to put that in. So we get a lot of nice points. That's pretty cool. But it's not really enough points. If I were to copy right now, I'm just going to hook this up here. And I'm going to view this. We can see that we can clearly see through the ballast. They're all the same direction. Looks really weird. And that's not what we need. So I'm going to actually scale by density. And I want my density to be 100, but I don't want to have a total count. So that's going to be messing that up. So we can already see it gets better. Add one more, so we get a really thick grid. I want to pack an instance because that's just going to make it a lot faster. And what I want to do is I want to create another point jitter. So we have our points here. I'm going to create a point jitter, and that will allow us to move our points a little bit off the basic grid that we had before. You can see they move up, down. It just looks like a very bad volume right now, and that's because it's way too big. So we're going to minimize our scale a little bit. So now we get like a nice up and down going. Or up and down going, it's a nice movement. I actually want all our points to be a little bit higher, because right now they're on the ballast, and I actually want the ballast to be slightly higher. And we can just easily do that with a transform node. I'm just going to move them up a little bit. The y-axis. Maybe 2. Yeah, that's enough. And the reason why I want to move them up is, if you remember correctly, when we were creating our sleepers, we had our sleepers perfectly on top of the ballast. And I don't need all of these points if there's going to be sleepers, right? So I want to select the points that are inside of a sleeper. That way we don't generate all those extra instances that we don't really need. So the way we can do that is we can create another object merge, and we can search for our sleepers. So again, let's make this a little bit bigger so we can actually see. So we don't need our ballast. We want our sleepers, and we want our out sleepers. Hit accept. Now you can see, if I hit the purple flag, this is everything that's inside. So the next thing that I want to do is, from this transform, I want to group. I'm going to group all the points. So I'm just going to view the points again. I'm going to group all these points based on this bounding object. Right now it's set to the base group. We actually want to have it in a bounding region, and we want it based on an object. We don't want primitives, we want points. And you can see, automatically selects them. That's really nice. So some points are still below, but that's okay. This at least allows us to select most of these points. Right, then again, very simple. I just want to delete those points because we don't need to copy to it. Group 2, because that was our points. And then the next thing that I want to do is I want to create, again, an attribute randomize. So first of all, we're going to do the normal again. Oh, not a blur. Hit that in here, view it. Now it's random color. We don't want a random color, we want a random normal. And that will rotate all of them. And that already gives us a very nice view of what could be the outcome of our entire setup. The next thing I want to do is I want to give a little bit of variation for the scale. And we can do that with a similar attribute, randomize, because we know all our points have a set scale. So if I change this one to p scale, we can see it has very tiny rocks and very big rocks. That's because our minimum value is 0. We don't actually want it to be 0. We want it to only be a little bit smaller than usually, and I actually can crank the biggest size up a little bit, which gives us a nice full grid of rocks. Okay, I'm gonna hit L again. And there we have our high poly output. So we had our low poly, and this is going to be our high poly. So instead of low poly, high poly. And of course we have our group named correctly again. Hit L. So now we have two output groups. I'm just going to place a switch. Oh, not a sweep, switch. We have our low poly, we have our high poly, and that's going to be our actual output. Again, naming, giving the correct shape, the correct color, and there we go. Now I want to be able to use this switch, of course, so I'm going to go out again, go to our type properties, and in our ballast settings I actually want to be able to choose between what type of ballast I want. I'm going to create another toggle, put it all the way at the bottom. I'm just going to call this high poly ballast. High poly ballast. Apply. I want its default settings to be set to 0, so whenever something gets generated, it uses the original shape. Okay, well, we can copy that parameter. It looks like I didn't save it correctly, so let's try again. High poly ballast. I'm gonna remove this one. Let's hit accept. Oh, now we have it right. Go back into our ballast, into our switch. Just hit paste relative reference, and we can see, okay, it takes in the right high poly ballast. And now if we go out and we view just our train track generator, we can switch between collision, can turn off high poly and low poly ballast. Okay, let's save this and let's check it out in Unreal. Rebuild selection, because we added some new parameters. You can see it rebuilds everything, keeps the materials, keeps the standard settings that we had, this one to concrete. But now if we set it to wood, you can actually see we have the possibility to jitter. If we type in jitter, we can move this one. And there we go, looks nice. Then in the ballast, we can also switch between low and high poly ballast. So I tick this, and there we go. We have a nice high poly version. If I hit play, you can see we can still walk around. And it looks really nice. Starting to look like something. But the blue is kind of weird, the red is kind of weird. So let's start with those. First I'm going to add the ballast. And there's actually a really cool rock in here called basalt. Or I think that's how you pronounce it. So I'm going to, again, copy this reference. I'm going to dive back into Houdini. Go to our ballast. As we said before, we had our Unreal material here. Turn this one off for a sec. And again, I'm just going to type it in here. I'm going to save it. Save our node type. Then for our rails, we have this one here, but we haven't had a material yet. Add Unreal material. And instead of one Unreal material, I'm actually going to create two for this one. And the reason why is if you look at reference of real train tracks, is that you can see that usually this part is rusted, but the top part, this part over here, that's usually there's no rust on it because there's a lot of trains going. So you have this very high reflection going on there. And we can actually do that with the materials as well. So I'm going to create a group again. And I'm going to name this rails. I'm going to create another group. This one's not going to be rails, but it's going to be rails top. Now in our Unreal material node, we can easily set, okay, I want this one to be focused on just the rails or just this. So let's see, we have our group here, and if we go here, we want this one to be our rails, and then this one to be our rail top. This one's okay, this is selecting everything. But for our real top, I actually only want to select the top parts. And we can do that the same way we did the ballast. So keep by normals, actually want it in the standard up direction. I'm gonna hit 0 here. And then when I move this down, you can see we get more and more. Well, this looks pretty good. For now, this is just an easy selection. So I'm gonna hit this 6. And our out rails have our full group. Okay, so in Unreal we still need to check some materials. So what would be cool? Maybe the metal steel would be a nice one for our entire rails. So I'm going to copy the reference back into Houdini. In here, our normal rails. Type that in. That's our first one. And then for our second one, the rails top, we need a really reflective one. So what would be good? Maybe chrome would be nice. It's a nice reflection. Copy the reference. Back to Houdini. Type it in. Now the next thing that I want to do, that I already told you guys before, is we want to be able to show the color coding. So again, I'm going to type properties. I'm going to create another toggle. It's going to put that toggle all the way in the top. I'm going to type this add collision. It's a little clearer. And then in this one, what do I want? Well, I want to use the color coding in general, so I'm going to set the default to 1. And then I'm going to rename my parameter to color coding. Hit apply, accept. So now this is standard. This collision, I don't want that to be standard. I don't want that to be our default value. I'm going to copy this. The best way to do this is to create an attribute delete and a switch node again. And we want it to be able to switch between color coded and not color coded. So it's here, not color coded, and color coded. And what attribute do we want to delete? Well, we know it's on the primitives, and we know it's Unreal materials. So any Unreal material that's on there will be deleted. And this is where the tricky part comes in, because before, well, it's not really tricky, but this is where the interesting part comes in. So before, when we were creating the ballast, right, we actually set this one to pack an instance, which means that it will keep the Unreal material in there. It doesn't see it anymore because it's instanced. So we have to add this switch here. Paste relative reference, so color coding again. And now we actually, before creating and packing it as an instance, we actually change if we want it or not. So usually you want to have as few nodes as possible, and the way to do that is to place these kind of switches along at the bottom, but in this case we have to place an extra one here. Alright, let's save our node type, and let's dive in Unreal, and let's check if it works. I'm going to rebuild this one. It's going to create everything normal because of our color coding. Then if we turn our color coding off, don't use the color coding, it should switch to all materials. That looks pretty good. Alright, well that basically does it for now. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. For now, this was Dokai. Bye bye.